Today's session is going to be on post-placement support. So what we can do to really set up, once a new position has been created for a young person with disability, what we can do to support them to set that position up for success. I do want to do an acknowledgement of country. I'm working today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and thank them for their custodianship of these lands that were never ceded. Also just acknowledging that it's been 1 year since the referendum on the voice, and that has been a difficult time for many of our First Nations people, so paying respect to how they have managed that experience. I'm also acknowledging that we have people from around the country and from other nations with us today, so paying respects to the traditional owners of all the lands that they come together from. I'm just going to come back here because I wanted to say a thank you to those who are returning from our first session, which explored the teachings from customised employment with a particular focus on engaging with employers to design roles that allow people with disability to contribute in meaningful and valuable ways to their employing organisations. It's important to note that customised employment is recognised as best practice when we're working with people with quite complex disabilities. For those of us who work across a broader spectrum of disability, we know that not all people will benefit from a fully customised approach. We can still, however, draw from the customised approach in our work. An example that comes to mind for me that has really resonated in the work that I'm doing at the moment with mainstream youth employment services has been the framing of young people through their conditions for success, as opposed to framing them via their diagnosis. The employment coaches that I'm working with have reported that this approach has helped them to introduce young people to employers in a positive way that provides solutions rather than presenting them by their barriers. In all our coaching, it's important to meet the people that we're working with where they're at and to draw on the most appropriate tools as they're needed. Elements of the customised employment approach have many useful ways for working that we can add to our toolboxes so that we are equipped to connect people with disability with meaningful and sustainable opportunities. Today, we're going to hear from Milton about the customised employment approach to supporting people with disability and their new employers to tackle the first weeks and months of new roles. We encourage you to consider how these teachings could support the people that you are working with. Shortly, we'll hear from Milton about best practices in setting up new employment relationships for success. Depending on the level of support that both the young person and their new employer needs, this can be a really time-intensive activity. As job coaches and career supporters, we may not always have the time or resources to do this work ourselves. There are, however, a number of supports within our system that can take on that role. As coaches and career supporters, we can assist by knowing what's best practice so that we can then support the people we're working with to select the best options from what is available to them. Our role can be in supporting the people we're working with and their employers to find the right mix of post-placement offerings. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about what is available in our employment system within Australia. And just to note, on the right side of the screen here, there's a photo of a young person working on a car in a mechanics workshop. Today's webinar is brought to you by the National Collaboration on Employment and Disability, which has a goal of working towards genuine and lasting reform so that young people with disability can successfully transition from education into decent and socially valued employment. I also just wanted to give a quick shout out to the people who are with us today from the Ticket to Work networks, which was the project that led into the National Collaboration on Employment and Disability. We're really excited to explore with you over the coming weeks and months how we can support each other's work and work together moving forward. I'm going to skip my Milton Tyree introduction and we'll come back to that when he arrives. But for my part of the presentation, I wanted to talk to you and support a good understanding of what is available to young people with disability in Australia who've recently started a new employment opportunity. I'm going to have a chat about job access, disability employment services, and also the support that we can access through the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And just a note that I have a photo on the screen there of two young people wearing blue overalls in a workshop. So job access, it's the national hub for workplace and employment information for people with disability. So it's a federally funded program, and they also support employers and service providers. One of the ways that they can help, which is one of my favourites, is just a telephone advice line. The 1-800 number that's at the bottom of the screen here. An employer, a person with disability, someone from a disability employment service or any employment service can call that line for advice about anything to do with people with disability and employment. It doesn't have to lead to anything formal. It can be just an informal chat, but it can also support accessing more formal supports from Job Access and others as well. The Employment Assistance Fund is another fantastic part of what Job Access administers, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that on the next screen. They also have an employer engagement service known as the National Disability Recruitment Coordinator, who can work with large employers to improve their access and inclusion policy and procedure around employment. They also administer the Complaints Resolution Referral Service and the National Disability Abuse and Neglect Hotline, which is important for us to know in our work and to be able to share with the people that we work with. And I've just included some ways that you can access Job Access on the bottom of the screen here. They have a chat function on their website, which is fantastic, and you can also get support to access them through a disability employment service. And I've just included the purple Job Access logo at the bottom of the screen here that reads Driving Disability Employment. So I mentioned before about the Employment Assistance Fund. I'll refer to that for the rest of the presentation as the EAF. And this is how the government can fund workplace adjustments and assessments for people with disability. It starts off with a free workplace assessment, where an assessor will come in and conduct what's called a workplace modification assessment. And from that, they can provide recommendations around adjustments that can be made or modifications, or what the EAF might be able to fund for the person with disability. It can cover things like making adjustments to the physical workspace, modifications to vehicles, special equipment, equipment for information and communication. It can cover the cost of some Auslan interpreting, as well as providing training around disability awareness and mental health awareness to colleagues and managers, which is, I think, a really fantastic opportunity for workplaces. And just in the blue box on the side here, there is a statistic that says 96% of people who are recipients of the Employment Assistance Fund remain with the same employer 2 years after having received workplace adjustments, which I think just really highlights how well this support can help people with disability and their employers. There's not really any other interventions in the Australian space that has such a successful outcome. There are some eligibility requirements around getting support from the EAF. The most important ones being that the job needs to be expected to continue for 13 weeks or more and provide at least 8 hours of work per week. It'll be interesting to see how that changes now that, or if that changes now that the new DES has removed the 8-hour restriction. And it can also cover a range of different workplaces, including people who are self-employed. To be able to access the EAF, an online application needs to be made, and this could be done by the person with disability or somebody who is their family or supporter. It can be done by an employer, by an employment service provider, or you can call that 1-800 number and the Job Access advisors can support somebody to work through that online inquiry. And then again, on the right side of the screen, I have another stat that says 94% of employers reported that employee productivity increased post a Job Access intervention. So it works just as well for employers as it does for employees. And I think sometimes the best way to kind of see or understand how a support can work really well is to have a look at a case study. So here I'm sharing Mia's journey. Mia recently graduated with a diploma in graphic design. She had called the 1-800 job access number to get some advice around adjustments in the recruitment process. And having done that, she successfully landed an entry-level graphic design role. Mia has really strong attention to detail. She has a unique perspective which supports her creativity in graphic design, and she's really resourceful and resilient. But to thrive at work, the conditions for success are that she requires direct and clear communication with strong feedback loops so that she can celebrate her successes but address any concerns without having to be anxious about them in the build-up. She also needs a quiet and calm workspace because this helps her to focus and be creative. So once the free workplace assessment was done, the assessor suggested or recommended that the EAF could fund a subscription to an online communication platform that really worked with Mia and supported her to communicate comfortably with her manager. They also funded some soundproofing panels in Mia's workspace so that she could be creative, and also a pair of noise-cancelling headphones, which helped her maintain her focus. They also came in and delivered some team training around diverse communication, which really supported the team to understand their strengths within the team. And with the support of the assessor, she was able to negotiate a graduated start to her role as well. So she began working 2 half days and over 3 months moved up to full-time. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the disability employment services and recognising that they do a lot of work in the early stages of discovery and job planning and job matching. But we're going to focus a little bit more specifically today on how a DES can support somebody who has just been placed in a job. So a DES is a disability employment service. It's a federally funded specialist employment program that supports people with disability, injury or health conditions to find and retain suitable employment in the open labour market, which is important. And they can also provide support to employers if needed. So while I mentioned they can do help with job search and resume prep and that sort of thing, they can also provide wage subsidies and employer engagement. It's really important to note that participating in DES often is paired with mutual obligations because a person may be receiving income support from the Australian government, and so that can have an impact on the way that supports are delivered. But somebody can also come into DES as what's known as an eligible school leaver. So this is a student who might be in their last 12 months of school or working in a school-based apprenticeship or be a recipient of the disability support pension. So sometimes there can be a little bit of misconception around DESs working with students in schools. So important to highlight that it is a possibility. DESs also deliver what's known as the Work Assist program, which can support workers who are at risk of losing their job due to the impacts of their injury, disability or health conditions. So it's not just people who they have supported to find a job, but also somebody who has a job but is at risk of losing it. And I have a photo on the screen here of a young person in a yellow jumper looking at a laptop screen, and there is a woman sitting beside him talking to him. So a couple of points that are good to be aware of with disability employment services. Providers really need to be confident that a placement is a good fit and that the job is a quality, sustainable option for the participant before they're allowed to report it as an outcome. They can be there to support the participant to settle into a new role and to work through any issues that might arise with the person with disability and their employer. They can help with things like job design, work assessments, workplace modifications. They can support the new employee to learn the new skills required for their role. And they can also deliver some training for co-workers and managers around any issues that come up related to the employment of the person with disability. There are varying degrees of support depending on what the person needs, and that can be provided for up to 52 weeks. And beyond that, there is an assessment that can be conducted if it's deemed as something that's needed. And DESs can also provide wage subsidies, and they change depending on the circumstances, but up to $1,600 at a 13-week benchmark and up to $6,000 at a 26-week benchmark to be paid to employers to provide those extra supports that a person with disability might need. And on the right side of the screen, I have the Disability Employment Services logo, which is a bit of a swirl with greens and blues in it. So to have a look at a bit of a case study of how DES can support a young person we might be working with, we're going to hear about Emma, who's a 17-year-old school leaver. She did some work with her DES provider to explore her strengths and interests and undertake some skills training, and has decided that she would like to be a carpenter and has successfully landed a carpentry apprenticeship. She has a natural talent for working with her hands, a keen eye for design, and strong work ethic and enthusiasm for learning. To thrive in her role, Emma's conditions for success are that she needs to be supported to establish clear, achievable goals, allowing her to track her progress, celebrate milestones, and keep her motivated and focused on her development. She needs open lines of communication so that she can ask questions and help identify any areas for improvement. When learning, Emma requires training that begins with a demonstration and then plenty of time that is dedicated for her to practice before she's required to officially conduct that skill. And she also requires an inclusive team environment. Encouragement from her co-workers can significantly build her confidence and motivation. So the DES is able to support through regular check-ins from where the DES staff visit and facilitate conversations with Emma and her manager and address any concerns with a little bit of support. They can also offer skill development workshops. So the DES staff will come in and support Emma to learn the specific carpentry tasks that she'll need, and not just training Emma in those tasks, but supporting her managers and supervisors to learn how Emma learns best, so that moving forward, the DES staff don't need to be there constantly to provide that support for her. They also suggested a buddy system and supported the employer to set up a situation where Emma was paired with a supportive co-worker, so she has somebody to go to when she has questions and someone for support around her daily tasks. She's also been supported by her DES worker to connect with the supports that are available through TAFE when she's doing the training aspect of her apprenticeship, and also through the apprenticeship support network, who are able to provide mentoring for her. They've also supported the employer and Emma to build some really positive feedback mechanisms that allow her to discuss her experiences and identify any areas for improvement in a constructive manner. And to the right side of the screen, I have a photo here of Emma. She's wearing a hard hat and she's standing in a workshop holding a power tool. So NDIS, this is a big one that can be really confusing for people. So in our roles, it can be good just to have a basic understanding of how it works and how it can support people in employment. So there are two different sections in the plan where employment supports can come into play. First one is in core and can support things like on-the-job assessments, customisation, training and support with daily work tasks, direct supervision, and also non-face-to-face activities that can support the participants' employment. Coming out of the capacity building section of a person's plan, we can have employment-related assessments and counselling and advice. Employment assistance, which was previously known as SLES, but is now open a little bit more broadly. But those SLES supports can now be accessed through this section of the plan. A support coordinator is another fantastic part of the plan that can support a young person to manage their plan, to find the right providers, to understand their goals and how their funds can support them to reach them. We can also access psychosocial recovery coaching. So for people who are experiencing barriers due to mental health, can support them to prepare for work and across their first experiences of work. We can also have support on the job or in work experience. And it's important to note that NDIS funding for employment is intended for people who require intensive supports to pursue their employment goals. So generally, these would be greater than what a DES or job access might be able to provide. They are available in any working environment, including micro businesses, self-employment, or a family-run business. And they can be delivered both to individuals or groups. And while the provider doesn't need to be the employer, it can be the employer who can provide the supports in this plan. Talk a little bit more about that in a second. So how can we help people get ready for employment through their NDIS plans? Because often we know young people will come to us and aren't really sure what's in their plan or how to use it really effectively. So some ways that we can support that is understanding that to be able to spend NDIS funds, we need to have a goal in the plan that is related to employment. It can be as simple as I want to find a job, or it can be more specific if the person has a clearer idea of what they would like to achieve. It's important to know that the funds that come under core support, like I was talking about in the last screen, are quite flexible. So there doesn't necessarily need to be a mention of work support or employment support if there are core, if there is funding for core and there is a goal in the plan around employment. Capacity building supports, however, are less flexible and need to be specifically mentioned in a person's plan to be able to access them. If there are not sufficient funds available or there isn't the right goal or funding within the plan, then the young person can submit a change of circumstances form to initiate a plan review. And so the change of circumstances could be that they're now ready to, it's a life transition, they're ready to start a new role and they need support to be able to do that. Sometimes when we're working with young people, the plans themselves don't give you a lot of information about how they can be used. So the people that can support us to build that understanding are the participants themselves, the people in their family or support circle who have supported them through NDIS and have a stronger understanding. We can also, we can also ask the young person themselves if they're comfortable with us talking to their local area coordinator or their support coordinator. It's important to know who can deliver NDIS funds as well. So you'll hear from Milton hopefully shortly around natural supports in a workplace and how these are often the first place we should look when we're looking to build the skills and support around a young person. So that should be the first place that we can look. But getting our head around registered and unregistered providers is important as well. So if a young person has a plan that is managed by the NDIS, the funds are managed by the NDIS, then they can only purchase supports through a registered provider. If they manage the funds themselves, which is known as self-managed, or if they are plan managed where they pay a third party to manage the money in their budget for them, then they're able to purchase supports from unregistered providers. So only NDIS registered providers are regulated by the Quality and Safeguards Commission, but all providers, regardless of whether they're registered or not, must adhere to the NDIS Code of Conduct. And I'll just quickly run through one example of how NDIS has supported a young person. In this instance, we can see Noel in the photo on the right side of the screen here with a group of his colleagues who have a job in a retail store. They're all wearing the blue uniform T-shirts and the lanyards around their neck. So Noah's just finished year 12 at his specialist school. He's landed his first job as a customer service representative in a big brand retail store. Noah consistently strives for excellence in every task that he undertakes. He has natural people skills and a desire for growth. His conditions for success are that he requires assistance with task management and communication. He needs customised training that addresses both the specific skills of the job as well as soft employment skills. And it's really important that this training is delivered in a way that is really engaging to Noah. He requires clear expectations and feedback from his supervisors and opportunities for skill development so that he doesn't get bored. And he also needs the ability to adjust his work hours or tasks around his health. So Noah has a plan, and in his plan, an NDIS plan, and in his plan, he has a goal to find a job in retail, build his work skills and confidence so that he can perform his new role independently and effectively. He has finding and keeping a job in the capacity building section of his NDIS plan, which is plan managed. So remembering that's when there is a third party who can deliver, who can manage the money in his plan, which means he can seek support from unregistered providers. So the first part of his plan that he's going to access is his support coordinator. So this is a person who can help him understand how his funds can be spent and to find the right providers to deliver them. They can also support him to access job access to negotiate flexible work arrangements and training for his new managers and colleagues. Through his NDIS funds, he's able to secure a job coach who can help with intensive on-site training in his first weeks, helping him to understand his job expectations, learn about workplace technology, and develop effective communication and strategies. This job coach has also used some of that non-face-to-face funding to be able to develop some training resources. And this one's really cool. It's in a gamified training app. So it's a game that Noah is able to play that supports him to practice responding to a range of workplace scenarios. And then he's also been able to attend some workshops at a local employment service funded through his NDIS that helps him with workplace communication and social interaction. He'll learn in these sessions around, learn about workplace dynamics, but also how to advocate for himself and his needs at work. I have another young person here who has used her NDIS funds really innovatively as well. So Sylvie is a 22-year-old woman who's just secured an apprenticeship as a baker. She's pretty excited after having done some work experience at a local bakery and has developed a passion for baking, and she's very creative. She has fantastic attention to detail, and having lived through her experiences of anxiety, ADHD and autism, also has real resilience and adaptability, which showcase her determination to succeed. To be able to thrive in the workplace, Sylvie really needs open communication so that she can express her needs and ask for help comfortably. She would like to be able to work in the quieter hours of business so that she's not overwhelmed by large crowds. She really appreciates a supervisor that provides regular check-ins and feedback so that she can address challenges and celebrate her successes as well. She would like to have a quiet place she can go to if she is experiencing sensory overload, and would like to be able to use noise-cancelling headphones while she works. And it's also really important to Sylvie that she has clear pathways for skill progression. She really wants opportunities to learn advanced baking techniques and also explore the different parts of business that aren't necessarily just related to the baking part of running a bakery. So through her NDIS plan, Sylvie has a goal to one day own her own bakery. She has core funding and finding and keeping a job funding, which she manages herself. So once again, she has accessed a support coordinator to help her manage her plan. She was also able to access some employment-related counselling. So she will have some time with a therapist outside of work who specialises in workplace anxiety. And rather than bringing in an outside job coach, she's negotiated with her manager that she will be able to purchase some extra training time from a qualified baker at her workplace so that she can learn her job in the environment that she's comfortable in and from somebody that really knows the trade of baking. And out of her accessing community and social funding within her plan, she's also joined an All Abilities drama class, which will help her to build her social skills, which again will have impacts for her work life. I wanted to quickly mention that local area coordinators are a role within the NDIS, but they can support all people with disability, not just people who have plans. So an employer or a person with disability could go into their local LAC and be connected with the supports that are available in their community, whether they be training programs or workshops, coaching and mentoring and counselling services, or local community groups that can provide support networks and peer support, where people can share their experiences and gain insights, as well as support to access and connect with mainstream support services like Job Access. And I've included down the bottom here the www.ndis.gov.au/contact. If you go to that site, there is a provider finder where you can have a look for the local LACs in your area. And I wanted to just finish off with a look at how we can blend and braid some of these fundings. Sometimes we can get a little bit from one area and another bit from another to provide a really well-rounded support system for the people that we're working with. So in this case, we have Alex, who is a 19-year-old young person, really passionate about technology and coding. He's recently secured a position as a junior software developer. Alex has exceptional problem-solving skills, a unique ability to focus intensely on tasks that interest him, and strong analytical skills, which allow him to pay strong attention to detail. To succeed at work, Alex conditions for success are regular communication with his supervisor regarding expectations, progress, and areas needing improvement. He would like a little bit of support to build his relationships with his co-workers, support to establish clear goals for development, and he likes to be provided constructive feedback so that he doesn't get anxious about what he might be missing out on. He requires a quiet working environment, which helps him to focus on his tasks, and customised training programs that focus both on the technical skills and the social interactions can help him build his effectiveness in the workplace. So some NDIS support that he's able to access is assistive technology. Assistive technology. So because Alex uses his noise cancelling headphones in all areas of his life, this can be funded through the NDIS. If he only needed them for work, then it would be something that Job Access could provide. He's also able to access some intensive on-site training in his first weeks to help him understand job expectations, learn about workplace technology, and develop effective communication strategies. He's also accessed some employment-related counselling with a therapist to specialise in workplace social skills training. And again, support to access the community can help him build his social skills. His DES provider is able to provide those regular check-ins, helping to provide that communication between him and his supervisor. They also organised some training through Job Access to support his co-workers to understand about autism and how they can create a supportive workplace. And also worked with his supervisor around communication strategies and adjustments that can facilitate success, as well as making sure his workstation is comfortable for him. And the job coach has also supported Alex and his manager to work on a buddy system so that he can be paired up with a supportive colleague to help him understand workplace culture. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen there and have my fingers crossed that we have Milton in the room. Sarah, are you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Welcome, Milton. Thank you so much.
Alas, I am here, and I'm so embarrassed. I apologize for my confusion on the time frame. So
no, the fault is mine. I apologize.
So anyhow, it's really nice to be here, Amy, and I sure appreciate you changing the sequence of our presentations. So I'm all ready to go. And again, I appreciate the invitation to do these two online workshops. If you participated in the workshop in September, then this one will tie right in. But if you didn't participate in the first one, that's fine too. because this one can stand on its own. Today's focus is on post-placement support. And so, Amy, I know we went a little out of sequence there, but I'm thinking that what you described about supports through DES and NDIS, with the examples of Mia and Emma and Noah and Sylvie and Alex, I think all that's going to be complementary to what I'm talking about here. So just like last time, I'll make a PDF of the slides I used today, and I'll share them with Amy to share with you. So let's go ahead and get cooking here. This is what I have planned for today. The first topic is a review from last time. Last time we talked about what I called the 3 big shifts in open employment over the last 35 years. And last time we focused on the first 2 of these. This time, we're going to get into the third one. We'll explore the evolution of job supports. And related to how we're going to do that, I'm going to use a couple of principles that I have found to be very helpful around what is the proper role on the job for the job coach. And one of these is through social role valorization theory. It's called the culturally valued analog. And I'll describe that. And I'm going to spend most of the time on an interrelated complementary process through Mark Gold and Associates that we call the 7-phase sequence. And we've already done part 4, an Australian context for external support. So again, thank you, Amy, for switching our sequence here. So as a matter of review, these first 3 shifts, the first shift is starting with the person, not the job, the process of discovery. And again, I feel like that was nicely illustrated in the stories that you shared, Amy, that this isn't an arbitrary job. We're thinking about jobs that fit the person, and we start with the person, not the job. So here we have 2 photos of Millie talking with KBR employees, the first one in an office and the second one walking down the hall with a supervisor. And last time, we took a look at how Millie's year 12 internship at KBR, how the stage was set for that through discovery and informed through discovery, starting with the person, not the job. The second big shift that I've seen is negotiating jobs of mutual benefit for the employee and the business instead of being limited to job descriptions or customized employment that we talked about in September. So last time, we looked at Jack's job at Unilodge at Australian National University, a job that was customized according to the needs of Unilodge and Jack's conditions, interest, and contribution. So here we have 2 photos of Jack's job at Unilodge. On the left, there's a photo of him studying a computer display while seated at the reception desk. And then there's another photo also with Jack at the reception desk, this one handing a package to a student who goes to the university. Now, the third big shift that we didn't talk much about last time, other than me mentioning it, is thinking about how people with disabilities learn their jobs. What is the proper role of the job coach or the external support person? Here are 2 photos of Gus in his job at Martino's that I mentioned last time. In one of the photos, he's holding supplies for a barber, and in the other, he's sitting behind the reception desk awaiting clients to sign in. Now, last time I said that Gus had learned his job at Martino's from other employees. This will be our topic of focus for today. How people with disabilities receive instruction and support profoundly influences how that other person, the person with a disability rather, perceives themselves, and how coworkers, supervisors, other members of the public perceive the person with a disability in their work. Now, the big question, to me, in terms of, and this is all based in perception, the big question is, what is the predominant role of the worker with a disability? Is it employee of the business, or is it a client of human service? And the reality is, oftentimes, both will be true. The person is a client of a human service and also a legal employee of the business. So how is the person perceived? And a lot of how that person is perceived is going to be related to what instruction and support looks like. And that's what we're going to examine here. I'm going to start with a historical context around the evolution of job supports. So you have a photo here of a small diner in an older, quaint part of the city of Louisville, where I live. It has an awning with the diner's name, Barristers. And this is a story about Jim working at Barristers. And it begins with my very early work in the field at Community Employment Incorporated in the early 1980s. This was prior to any of us at Community Employment knowing anything about discovery. And that has relevance to what I'm going to describe now. I remember sitting with Jim and his folks in his house and asking a very non-discovery kind of question. And my question was, what do you want to do? And I say it's a non-discovery question because in the first meeting, I would never assume that a person would have a range of experience to know the answer to that question. Nonetheless, I didn't know any better, and that's what I asked. And Jim immediately answered the question. But before I tell you how he answered it, I'm going to give you a little background on Jim. And so here's what I didn't know, but I learned after I got to know him a bit. So Jim had attended a special school in Louisville, all students with disabilities. And when he was at the special school, he had a job in the school cafeteria, and his job was loading, unloading, and drying the trays from the dishwashing machine. So when I asked Jim the question, what do you want to do? What do you think his answer was? Just put it in chat. What do you think Jim said he wanted to do when I asked him that question? Dishes. That's it. He wanted to wash dishes. He wanted to work in a kitchen. Yeah, so he said, I want to be a dishwasher. Exactly. So if I'd known about discovery, I would have instead said, Jim, I really need to get to know you. And I'm interested in learning about the kinds of things that you like to do, that you're good at doing around home, neighborhood, things you did in school, things you might do in your faith community. And if he would have volunteered then, yeah, same thing he had been doing. Somebody wrote in chat, exactly. If Jim had said to me, I washed dishes at school, and that was great. I really want to wash dishes. I would have said, all right, I'd like to learn a lot more about that. But I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to explore other possibilities too, because I'd like to look at employment really broadly with you. So you see, his answer to the question, nonetheless, was a pretty easy ask because lots of places need dishwashers. And there was this neat little diner, Barristers, that just opened downtown at Fifth and Market. And we were pretty sure that they would need some dishwashers. So here I have a photo of Jorana, one of my coworkers at Community Employment, sitting at a table in the diner with the owner of Barristers, Barry. And she was telling him about Jim's interest in being a dishwasher. And Barry said, well, let's take a look here. So here's a photo of Jorana taking a look at the job. The Barry is showing Jorana the control panel of the dishwashing machine. They set up an interview for Jim, and here's a photo of him interviewing for the job. And so this is in the diner too. And so it's Barry, Jim, and Jorana. This is at a time they weren't open, obviously. Jim was hired to be a dishwasher. So what did we do? How did we proceed? Well, on his very first day of work, not only Jim showed up, but also Jorana. So here we have a photo of Jim and Jorana in the dish room at Barristers. Jim attentively watching Jorana, instructing him in the operation of the dishwasher. And why did that happen? Well, because we had proposed to Barry and Jim, and they had agreed that Geronda would teach all of his job-related tasks. Now, we had proposed that Geronda do all of the training for two primary reasons. One is we thought we were pretty daggone good teachers, and in reality, we were. We'd studied teaching and systematic instruction. And we wanted to be sure that Jim learned the job. And two, we didn't want to take any extra time. We didn't want Jim to take any extra time that might be seen as burdensome to the business. We were concerned about that perception. So let's keep rolling here and see what happened. Well, here's another photo of Jim watching Geronda operate the dishwasher. So here's a question that Geronda and I got asked all the time when we used to do things this way. We would show up on the first day of work with the person in their brand new job, and they would say, "Who are you? And why are you teaching this guy to wash dishes?" I mean, it was very confusing to people, you know, and we would explain, "Oh, well, I work with community employment. We help people with disabilities get jobs. And so I'm helping Jim learn how to wash dishes here." So I ask you, at this point in time, what was Jim's predominant role at Barristers? Was his main role an employee, or was it Geronda's client? In reality, he's both. But how do you think he would be perceived? How do you think he saw himself, and how do you think his coworkers saw him? Primarily as Geronda's client or as an employee of Barristers? Put it in chat. What do you think? What was his predominant role here? Client. Trainee, perhaps. But I'm just giving you two choices. Employee or client, human service client. Which one? Which one of those two? Client. Employee. Okay, he is both. Sure enough, he is an employee. But here's my point. I think inadvertently, not that we wanted to do this, but it's what we did. Inadvertently, I think we portrayed him in the role of a client. Nobody else at Barristers had a job coach attached to them, teaching them things. And here's something else. You know, again, this wasn't done with any malice or ill intent, but looking back on it, I'm thinking about another historical negative role that people with disabilities have, and that is the role of burden. And I think we inadvertently put him in a burden role. We said, "Oh, we'll teach him because," I mean, we didn't say this, mind you, but I think our actions portrayed this. We didn't say he would be a burden, but I think our jumping in, running in and saying, "Oh, we'll do everything," portrayed him as a burden. You see? He was paid by Barristers, so he was earning a wage that any dishwasher would earn. He was officially an employee of Barristers, but I'm talking about perception, you see. And employee is such a big role, is such an important role that we always want to define that as clearly as we can. And as I said earlier, a lot of that has to do with how we act ourselves on the job. Let me show you one more example, because this is an example where the impact of the kind of support we provided had much more serious consequences than with Jim and Geronda. This is a photo from the mid-'80s. It shows two men seated in an office. In the foreground is a man seated at a desktop computer keyboard, and he has his arms at his side, and he's fitted with an adaptive head stick that he's using to type. This man's name is Tom. Tom is an employee of Jefferson County Planning Commission, and his job is data correction. Seated next to Tom on his right, behind a computer form scrolling machine, you'll see another man observing Tom, and his name is Chris. Chris worked with me and Geronda at Community Employment. He was another job coach. Now, by the mid-'80s, we were getting a lot better at including everybody in work. So Tom was a man who lived almost his entire life in an institution. He experienced significant impact from physical disabilities, and he was thought to have a significant intellectual disability. He'd never been to school. His speech was really hard to understand. But the more we got to know Tom, the more we doubted he really had an intellectual disability. But you can see here Chris providing all of the instruction for Tom. Now, one of the things we've learned in later years, and actually this has been researched in later years that we didn't realize at the time, was that the more significant the impact of the disability, the more important it is for people who typically provide support, Tom's coworkers, to provide instruction for him the very first day, because otherwise it's going to be really hard for people to be seen as an employee of the business. And they are going to be seen as our client. And this is exactly what happened to Tom. Now, Joanna with Jim at Barristers. After Jim learned the job, Joanna gradually faded her time, and Jim was working, and she'd follow up with people there. Very nice. When we got to the same point, the follow-up point, because Chris had taught Tom how to do his job, when we got to that point at Jefferson County Planning Commission, the manager of the office said to Chris, if you fade, if you leave, he leaves. Wow. Now, I think we could have done that a lot differently, knowing what we know today. Tom would have needed some support from Chris, but it would have been shared instruction, you see, and we would have been sure Chris would have orchestrated from the very first day Tom went into work for somebody else to be the first person teaching Tom something. That would put Tom clearly in the role of their employee, them clearly in the role of teacher, and Chris stepping back clearly in the role of advisor. You see? Do you see the difference? And so here it had a really high cost. I mean, it was a high cost to Tom in terms of looking a lot more dependent than he was, looking like a client of community employment instead of having the primary role of employee. It was expensive in dollars for us at community employment because I had to pay a support person to be with Tom when he didn't even need one. So what do you do instead? That's what we're going to talk about for the rest of our time today. Now, this first way of looking at this is through what I call the culture, what is known as the culturally valued analog. This is through social role valorization theory. And up in the upper right-hand corner of the slide, and many of these slides, I have put on top the logo for SRV theory, and then two interchanging arrows, and then below Mark Golden Associates logo to illustrate that this is a time when Mark Golden Associates and SRV theory are completely aligned around discerning the proper role of the job support person. What the culturally valued analog says is that you look at a practice that can be encountered with reasonable frequency in society, people in society be familiar with it, everybody would have high expectations and images. In other words, what is it that happens with anybody else in society doing that same thing with regard for their age, gender, and culture? And Australian culture and American culture is pretty darn similar. So I think we're okay on that front. Now, or the culturally valued analog relates to all kinds of things in life, but here we're focusing on employment. And so that's the idea about how do people, just regular everyday people, find jobs? That's important to think about. The second question is the one we're focused on here. How do people typically learn their jobs in any particular business? The CVA also relates to how people are compensated for their work and what's desirable work. Well, let's dig into the Mark Golden Associates approach to this because it's the very same idea. The title of this slide is Balancing Learner Needs and Generic Validity. And there's an image of scales, the old-timey kinds of scales in the middle of this slide, the kind where you would balance items on one side of the scale with items on the other side of the scale so that it's even. And this is the image we always need to have in our minds. So on one side of the scales, you have what you learn with people in discovery. What does the learner need in terms of instruction and support to learn the job? We want to be sure that's there, regardless of who's providing it. The other side of the scale is, but we always want to start with this idea of generic validity. What is it that's typical and valued in the business? How does everybody else learn the job? And here's the thing, we want to use that as much as possible. As much as possible. So the first thing we need to do then is study that. So here's a graphic of the 7-phase sequence that I'm going to talk through for the rest of our time today. At the top, you see that logo of SRV Theory and Mark Golden Associates being complementary. And I'm going to describe this 7-phase graphic. If we look at the very top, like the 12 o'clock top, we have phase 1. And then you go around the right side of the clock to phase 2, which is means, and phase 3, which is people. And then down at 6 o'clock, you have phase 4, which is how you decide how to facilitate successful performance. This is where the question is, who's going to do what? Phase 4, what is the proper role of the job coach? And then you start at the other side of the clock. Phase 5 is, maybe you didn't get the support right the first time, so it's a correction phase. What would we do instead? And then phase 6 is also a correction step, a correction phase. What if we need to think of more effective means other than what is typical? And then phase 7 is another correction phase. What if what is natural in terms of the ways of the company needs to be adapted or modified? We want to use what is typical and valued on the right side as much as possible. But it doesn't mean that that's always going to be sufficient, you see. So we're going to talk through this a phase at a time, and I have permission to use Sam's story. So here are a couple photos of Sam. Now, just like in the examples that Amy gave, we always start with discovery, thinking about Sam's interest, conditions, and contributions. So here on the left, you see a photo of Sam standing next to a really ugly car. This is a demolition derby car. It's built to be crashed. That's why it's so ugly. Cars being one of Sam's primary interests that I learned with him in discovery. And on the same slide on the right side is a photo of Sam standing next to a horse, his other primary interest. So I learned a lot about Sam and a lot about these interests in my discovery with him. And this led us to one of the targeted businesses that I explored for him, which is Satellite Equestrian. So I'm going to use Satellite Equestrian and Sam in the 7-phase sequence. So here are some photos just to give you a look at this pastoral, beautiful horse farm. Here we have a photo of a pasture with a fenced pond. And here's a mare with her colt standing next to a fence. And here's one of the signs at the farm. This is significant for a couple of reasons that I'll explain. The sign says that this is the University of Cincinnati Equestrian Team base. And it gives the owner's name, Missy Jo Hollingsworth, as the coach. I'm showing these to illustrate, all of these photos and this sign to illustrate that this is a highly desirable horse farm and a place that you would say is a high status horse farm. Missy Jo is a well-known and highly regarded trainer in the horse community. So this is really important because of the horse farm's affiliation with the University of Cincinnati. It had a lot of implications for the workers at the farm. You know, University of Cincinnati students would exchange labor on the farm for horse riding lessons with Missy Jo. Now here's the 7-phase sequence graphic again that I am going to unpack one step at a time with Sam. So the very first phase is the natural ways of the business. This is the culture of the business. How does it operate? What's important to them? So you look at the culture, like what are, what are the aesthetics of the business? Like I say, this is really beautiful place. What is the language that people use? So at a horse farm, I knew nothing about horses. So I knew the difference between horses and cows. I need to learn some horse speak. So they talk about Western riding and English riding. A flake of hay would be the amount of hay, how that's measured and so forth. You need to learn informal stuff like about celebrations. What do people do on people's birthdays? What's the managerial style? How do you see coworkers getting along with each other? What is the turnover rate like there? How old are people who work there? Is it mostly men or women? All of that kind of thing. What are the written and unwritten policies? So this is illustrating what I learned about Sam, especially related to Sam, I should say. One of the things I learned is that standards are high. And that's really important because another aspect of ways of a company is task method. One of the things that we know really helps people learn jobs well is a consistent method, everybody doing the task the same way. And if standards are high, that increases that likelihood that everybody is doing things pretty much the same way, which will make it easier for Sam to learn. There was no downtime, and that was good. I didn't get to tell you much about Sam, but one of the things I learned in Discovery was that he was a man on the move, a real high energy kind of guy. And, wouldn't make sense for him to be standing around, no downtime. This was really interesting to me. Everybody does everything. And so if there was a University of Cincinnati trainer standing around a stall that needed to be cleaned, that trainer would clean the stall. Everybody does everything there. I liked that. Turnover was low. That was really important because one of the things that I knew, a condition really important for Sam, was consistent people, especially a consistent supervisor. And that's why I have this in red, supervisors on the road a lot. This really concerned me. So it was something that we had to negotiate to work out so that Sam could have consistent supervision for, around a couple of months. All right. Also, just what I was seeking for Sam was his experience, work that would use his experience and interest in horses, physical, moving work, tasks where they're done or not done, clear range of correctness, and this people component. People who would take a personal interest in Sam. And I felt like all of that was there. I was really concerned about the supervisors being on the road, but other than that, it looked like a really good fit. So the next thing we look at is the means. This is the question we didn't used to ask at barristers and at Jefferson County Planning Commission. How would any new employee learn these tasks? How do they learn the job? And we want to remember new employee orientation too. So on the orientation end, I learned that everybody met with the office manager. And there's a photo here of Roxanne posing in her red shirt next to a barn. And Roxanne's the office manager. And so she met with Sam and went through one of these forms. I have an example of here, new employee orientation. This is a form that is titled Saddle Lake Staff Safety Guidelines. And it said things like, do not startle the horses, be safe. And it also said this, anything asked of you is, in all caps, is your job. Kind of along that line of everybody does everything here. And we just keep this place running the way it needs to run. Now, the other really critical part about means gets into how would a new employee learn the tasks that had been defined for Sam to learn. And what I learned was it is from an experienced person who has done those things, which is true in lots of businesses, isn't it? So I said, okay, I want to learn how they teach then and learn what their means for teaching is. And I also asked Missy Joe, the owner, do you have men who work here who would be experienced in those tasks? I've noticed that a lot of the workers here are women, but I think Sam would respond better to a man than a woman. And if there'd be somebody about his age, he was 20 then, who'd be especially mature, that would be ideal. And she said, yeah, actually, I do have somebody like that. He's 20. He's been working here since he was 17, and his name was Mike. And I said, well, then I'd like Mike to show me these tasks and how he teaches the tasks. So I spent a couple mornings at Saddle Lake. And here I have a photo of the hayloft filled with hay and the ladder to the hayloft. He showed me how to get up there and get the hay down. And then where does the hay go? This is a photo of the hay rack in a corner stall where the hay is to be placed. Here's a photo of a couple water buckets, each to be filled in the stalls, all of these Sam's tasks. This is a chart listing horse names, how much hay and grain they would get. And then finally, here's a photo of Mike filling a wheelbarrow with grain from the grain hopper. So like is true, that's the second phase. How would a new employee learn the job? And the third phase is really, so who does that? Now, so I've shown this kind of confluence with means and people, and it's because it happens lots of places. When you start asking about the means, how does somebody learn the job? They'll say, well, this person does that. Well, people really is the third phase, because we want to be sure we're paying attention to the right people. And so I'm going to show you a slide here of all the people who were identified, Mike being the most important one. And so Mike was showing me how to do all of these things, and he was a masterful instructor. One of the things that I noticed that he did so well, which is something I always teach, and I have trouble with myself, is if somebody makes an error, instead of saying, no, that's not what I said, or no, that's not it, he wouldn't do that. He would always reference the desired action. So he would say, oh, I see here, Mabel gets 2 flakes of hay. And I would pick up 1 flake of hay. He'd say, be sure you get 2. You see, or once I was out in the pasture with him, and he said, can you get that gate for me? And I started to open the gate, and it was a black gate. And instead of going, no, not the black one, he said, the green gate. You see, he would always reference the desired action. And I knew that would be especially important for Sam. And I remember explaining that to Missy Jo, and she said, that would be good for everybody, wouldn't it? And I said, it would be, but it's absolutely going to be essential for Sam. And there was Roxanne, and she was just really good at knowing where Sam was, how the day was going for him, and recognizing his contributions and also his vulnerabilities. If things weren't going well, she was good at knowing how to straighten that out. And then there were UC students who were there. And so Mike, we arranged for a period of time when Mike could be there for 6 consecutive weeks. And then Zara was one of the people who picked up when Mike left. And she was a UC student who also was skilled in these tasks. And she just had really good ideas. So I remember once I was doing follow-up. This is after Sam was working and I wasn't there at all. And she said, I asked how things were going, and she said, well, there's a problem. Sam is missing watering some of the horses. That's a big deal. And so I said, well, why do you think he's missing them? And she said, I think it's because he needs to be on the move so much. You remember, he's a real active kind of guy. And I think he has trouble standing there long enough to fill the buckets. And I said, what do you think we should do? And she said, you know, I've got an idea. Yesterday, I was in a stall with Sam, and he said, how come the horses like you, but they don't like me? And she said, that's ridiculous. They like you too. They just don't know you as well as they know me. So I'm going to suggest that when Sam watered the horses, a lot of times the horse is in the stall, he called the horse over and pat on it while he's filling the bucket. That way he can get to know the horse while he's filling the buckets. Anyhow, just fabulous people there. So our plan then had to be, who is going to do what? This is the facilitation phase. And here it was pretty easy. I didn't know anything about horses. Mike was this masterful teacher. So this was our plan. Mike would provide all the instruction for Sam, but I needed to be available in case either one of them would need some advice. Now, mind you, I knew all the tasks at this point. I'd been there 2 mornings, and Mike had given me instructions. So I knew during the schedule what Sam would be doing, what that should look like. And if he needed any help showing Sam something or Sam needed some help, they could call me. And I spent most of my time in the nice air-conditioned office, but I would text them. We had permission to communicate by text. I would text Mike because I knew about where they were, and I would circle around and observe some. Now, the reason I texted, when I was observing, I noticed that it would interfere with Sam's performance. So we did other things sometimes to communicate with what was going on. But the idea here is phase 4 means I need to be there, but as invisible as possible, but I need to be there in case I would be needed. Now, all of these other phases are actually correction phases. And honestly, in the interest of time, I think, well, maybe I'll just do them real quickly here. But here, I brought this picture of Tom back. This is the same picture of Tom and Chris at the Planning Commission, the Jefferson County Planning Commission. Now, here's why I brought Tom back. And it is that this thing of who's going to provide the support is not an all or nothing thing. With Sam, the decision was that Mike would provide all the support. That made a lot of sense there. If we had known about the 7-phase sequence when Tom got his job, as I said earlier, one of the things we would have known would be to orchestrate it. So the very first day, the very first person to teach Tom anything would have been somebody who had worked there. And Chris would have orchestrated that by going in ahead of time with Tom to meet the person who'd be supervising him. They would have looked at that task together, Tom and the person to be teaching Tom. Chris would have been right there. Tom's speech is really hard to understand. He would have been right there if he was needed, but he would have been in the background. And Ralph, one of Tom's coworkers, would have been the primary instructor. Now, Tom had a lot to learn in that job, and he did have really significant impact of disability. He had never learned to read. So he was, Chris was teaching him how to match letters, like match the sample and all of that. So it wouldn't have been reasonable to have asked a coworker to have done all of that. I don't think it was burdensome. It would have been too much time. It wouldn't have been a reasonable ask. So it would have been shared instruction, but that's what it would have been, you see. And I think that could have made a really big difference. Phase 4 for Tom would have been shared instruction. It would not have been all Chris. And I think we could have structured it so Chris would have been seen as more of a support person. All right. I'll just do these phases kind of quickly. 5 is a support substitute strategy. And a lot of times this isn't needed. It wasn't needed for Sam at Saddle Lake Equestrian. But Sam actually later on did have a job where it was needed. Sam had another job at a company called McDine's Auto Body. So here you see a photo of Keith McDine leaning over a bumper that's on a stand, a car bumper that's on a stand. And with his right hand, he's steadying the bumper, and with his left hand, he's sanding the bumper, and Sam is watching him. And then on the right, you see a photo of a fender that's on a similar kind of stand with a piece of sandpaper on top. And you see Sam reaching over with a rag to check the grade of the grade of the sanding that has been done on the panel. Now, this was a big part of Sam's job, was to ready car panels and bumpers for painting. So I did the same thing as with at Saddle Lake Equestrian. I spent time and learned how the job was typically taught. I know a bit about cars, so it wasn't such a stretch for me to learn about the preparing body panels for painting or priming. And so Keith was teaching Sam, and it was going just really nicely. And I never had taught Sam anything there. Keith had done all of the instruction. Well, I came back once to follow up to see what was going on. And what I noticed was that Sam was going over and asking lots of questions of Keith. And so I talked to Keith, privately about that. And I said, golly, I thought Sam had that down. And he said, well, I thought he did too, but he's asking a lot of questions and it really, I can't go help him because, I need to spray this car. I need to paint it. Here's what I feared was going to happen, that, Lowell or Keith, the other two people who work there, would just end up redoing what Sam had done, and it wouldn't really be a job for Sam. And so I said, well, this was a 3-man body shop, including Sam. And I said, you taught me how to do this when I was here. How about if I go back? I don't think Sam had really learned that job, and I thought he had. That's my fault. And so I provided additional instruction for Sam as a backup strategy. You see, I was wrong the first time. Or I thought Sam knew the job when he didn't. So this provided a correction strategy where Sam could get additional instruction, and it wasn't an unreasonable ask for the employer. Now, phase 6 deals with where there need to be a more effective means for learning the job. And so this really gets a lot into systematic instruction and thinking about informing strategies and that kind of thing. Maybe steps that need to be added to the task or that kind of thing. And then nothing like that ever was an issue at Saddle Lake. I'm going to skip over these slides. And phase 7 looks at adapting or modifying the natural ways. And so here again, we always want to begin with what is typical to the workplace. Now, there was an example here that came up actually, and this was around the watering the horses again that got to be a problem for Sam. It wasn't initially, but it got to be one. And Zara's idea was a really good idea, but it didn't work out. And so we had to go back and revisit that. And so that was really a task modification. It changed the method of the task. And what we did was we reordered the watering sequence at Saddle Lake Equestrian. So I'm going to show you a graphic here. It used to be, I have a graphic here that shows a walkway in between all of the stalls, and then the back and forth, the stalls on both sides of the walkway. And the way Sam used to water, the way everybody watered, was diagonal. You would start on the stall on the left, you would go directly to the one on the right, and then diagonally to the next one on the left, and then back to the right, then diagonally to the next one on the left. And watching this, we came to think maybe it would be better to look at the other graphic if maybe it's that horses are getting missed because the diagonal isn't completely diagonal. So the modified method was for Sam to go all the way down one side and all the way back the other. That's an example of a modified method. Now, the other thing that you might do would be an adaptation. And an adaptation, you keep the same method, but you add some informational or assistive aspect. And so there was an example of this that was proposed to me by Mike. And I always want to pay a lot of attention when a business proposes an adaptation or something to make a job work better for somebody. But I also knew from my experience around making adaptations that you want to always start with a modification if you can, because anytime you do an adaptation, it's something that always has to be in place. And so in just spending time with Mike, I explained to him that Sam's a guy who'd never learned to read a whole lot. And so when we were going through the list of horses and how much hay and grain a horse gets, he said, well, maybe I could color code the list and color code the stall, and Sam could get it that way. And I thought about that and I said, golly, that's terrific that you're thinking about another way for Sam to get that information. I said, here's my only concern about it, Mike, and it is that Sam is really sensitive to the idea of people thinking of him as different and having a disability. And I'm afraid the color coding might do that, might call attention to Sam not knowing how to read. But I said, I think we might need to do that, but I'd like to try something else first if we can. And that is just match the sample. All of the horse stalls had, like you see here, I have a photo of a horse stall that has Twinkle, the horse name on it, and I have that circled in red. And then on the chart, I have a photo of the chart and I have Twinkle and I circled it there. I said, I think Sam can see Twinkle on the chart and Twinkle on the stall door and know which horse is what. And that did end up working just fine. Okay, we've got 4 minutes left. And so we'll take some questions here for the time we have remaining. And I apologize again for getting us started so late. Any questions that y'all have?
So there was a question in the chat earlier on, and we may have answered it, but it was, so this was when you were talking about the original state and what happened in the early 80s. And the question was, were you and Jerona also trained how to use the commercial dishwasher or any of the other machinery related to the work?
Yes. Yeah, we were. And so, I mean, that's what we did back then. So some of it was similar. It's a good question. We would say, show us how to run the dishwasher so we can teach Jim. Now we say, if we were going to do the dishwashing job, we'd say, show us how you teach a dishwasher all of the tasks so we can think about how that's going to work for Jim. You see the difference? But both times it involved us learning the task. We still want to learn the task, but we want to learn how people teach. This time we learn the task and how people typically teach, and we can think about how that will work then.
Definitely.
As much as possible for the person to provide instruction.
And what I love about that is then that you can remove yourself, and the natural supports, the natural trainer has learnt how to adjust what they do to teach the person all of the skills that they'll need ongoing in their role.
That's right. And I'm in the background as an advisor, or the job coach is in the background initially as an advisor. Now you might say, well, that's a little stigmatizing too, and it is. I just think it's part of the cost, just to be sure that everything is working, you know.
Did anybody else have a question for Milton?
Yes, I do have a question.
Go for it.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Milton. Very interesting.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if at any time in the implementation of this 7-stage process or 7 steps process, if you had to talk to the team at a workplace,
yes,
about the prospective new employee and what sort of attitude or perceptions are likely to impact on the adjustment and fitting into the team. A sort of communication beyond talking to the boss and the immediate person who will be working with the client or the employee.
Well, that's on a need to know basis. It's a really good question. Here's where that takes place in the 7-phase sequence, the talking with people. It is who would need to know about the impact of Sam's disability. And my judgment was that that was Missy Joe and Mike and Roxanne. And so when I was at Saddle Lake for a good full day and a half, 2 half-day or 3 half-days, doing the job analysis, then spending the time with Mike, it gave me time to do just what you're saying, say, well, this is how Sam like I could tell Mike, you know, you're such a good teacher. Sam's going to respond so well to that because he's had such negativity in his life around learning things. He's gotten blamed a lot for the impact of his disability. Oh, you're not trying, Sam. You're not paying attention. And I said, just somebody who's going to reference the desired action and keep a positive attitude like you did with me is going to go a long ways with Sam, you know, because he has been misinterpreted. And so gave me a chance with some of the tasks. I mean, one of the things you look at Sam and you wouldn't think this would be an issue, but for lack of a better way of saying it, like motor planning was kind of hard for Sam. And you might think it would be easy to hold a rake this way, but it wouldn't be for Sam so much. And so we had a chance to talk about things like that.
Thank you very much.
I think it's giving people the information they need to know, the people who need to know, with permission from the person you're representing.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Milton. We've come to our time. Really appreciate you having spent some time with us over the last couple of months. And
yes, thank you so much.
thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a fantastic day.